Hi there, welcome to Moonrakers Tales, Wiltshire's Stories, a podcast by the Wiltshire Museum and its youth panel. We're your hosts for this episode. I'm Tom.
And I'm Amy. In this episode, we'll be focusing on the curious case of the Moonraker's tale, dating back to the 17th century when smuggling in rural England was oh so common.
That's exactly right. It's almost unbelievable that this story is the way we got our nickname. It's absolutely ridiculous, yet fitting.
As most folklore goes, this tale has several different ways to be told. We'll be focusing on the most known and popular one according to our sources.
In the town of Devizes lived an innkeeper called Ikey Perrott. On checking his cellar one February morning, he found he had run out of French brandy, an expensive spirit by any regard, and Perrott was used to getting his supplies cheaper than most. A man by the name of James Chapman had once promised him a delivery a good month ago, but no word had been exchanged between the two since. Perrott decided that it was time that he were to pay him a visit. Once reaching Chapman's house, he knocked on the door, finding a horrified man standing in the doorway. "Quick, get inside," Chapman said before hustling the innkeeper through the door, and promptly sat him down, only for a glass of ale to be pressed into his hand. Chapman took a deep breath. "You'll be here about the brandy," he said. "It's here, alright. Been here a good 3 weeks. I've had a right job getting it here, I can tell you."
He'd met up with one of his contacts, old Mabet, from Tilsway. He had a few casks he'd bought up from a Southampton man, and he brought a few off a man from Romsey. They'd figured that between the two of them, they would have the innkeeper supplied for months. So off they went to Southampton, and they had a plan for a smooth journey home. They had a cart and a donkey, loaded the barrels onto the cart and lashed them down, covered the whole lot with hay and tied that down with it. To be extra careful, they had gotten a spade, a shovel, and a couple of old hay rakes, and strapped them down to the side of the cart. They dressed themselves in a pair of farmer's smocks and slapped a broad-brimmed straw hat on their head, looking exactly like the part they were trying to play, simple coachy yokels, travelling with their donkey and carts.
They had chosen their night carefully, a bleak one, cloudy with slight drizzle, the kind of night that anyone would be happy to be cosy up by the fire with a cup of tea in their hand. A fine night for smuggling. So off they set, going as fast as a donkey would let them. It would be easy to go through the forest out of Southampton, under cover of the trees in the darkness. They knew the first test would be on the open Cranbourne chase. In their attire, they couldn't have looked less like poachers, but the excise men, people hired by the Crown to catch poachers and smugglers, the punishment for either crime was not pretty. Wouldn't have given a bother. They had their cudgels and ready to whack a poacher and send them straight to jail. But the clouds stayed low. There was no one about, and they were soon up at the Wiltshire Coppice, a popular woodland.
Home and dry, or so they thought. They moved steadily across the downs, heading north, past the woods at Front Hill, getting closer and closer to home. But now the night was changing. The clouds were breaking up, and they were able to see the full moon above the hills, with the clouds scudding fast across it. There was no one out that night. We all would have called it uncanny if it hadn't been so convenient. But by now all the clouds had gone, and the full moon lit the way as if it were a beacon. They were soon back in Devizes, sneaking up by St James's, using the churchyard and trees for cover. As they were skirting the Crummer Pond, their donkey froze. They froze as well, looking around for what had frightened it, but there was nothing to be seen. Mabet was all of a bother. He had leapt off the cart and began whacking at the donkey, hissing and urging at it to go on, but the animal wouldn't shift, just like its heels and more.
In all fairness, Chapman had warned Mabet to stop, telling him that it would only make it yell, and sure enough, the donkey was soon bellowing away, and I'm sure that the excise men, and every man, woman and child in the town, would find them and their brandy. They had both desperately told the donkey to stop, but the donkey had the last laugh, as Mabet brought his hand down hard on the donkey's back. It kicked out, and the cart upended. The hay, rakes, and shovels scattered all across the ground. For a moment the casks held, then they rolled out as well straight into the pond.
As expected, they were both cursing and swearing, I can confirm that. But as they waded through the pond, the casks bobbed up and down in the water, and they made an attempt to roll them out. But no sooner had they been in the pond, they heard the sound of the horses' hooves, pounding along the church walk towards them. Both of the men came to the same conclusion. It must be an excise man. But now they had a plan. Mabet grabbed the rakes, and Chapman pushed the barrels into the reed. "Now, when he gets here, you just get that rake and start raking up the water. Just there, and leave the talking to me," said Chapman. It was the excise man, sure enough, and he brought his horse right up to the edge of the pond, claiming the two to be night poachers, even as going as far to claim that he'll eat his hat if they weren't. Then he stopped, and seemed to see for the first time what they were doing.
"Oh, sir, we bent no poached, but have had a mishap, as you see. The donk made a sudden start, he get a kick, and went over things, which lays all about, and look, there's a girt yellow cheese. He rolled straight into the pond, and so we're reeking him out again," said Chapman, in his best Wiltshire accent. The excise man stared at the two a minute, rigging away at the bright white disc on the water, and then he burst out laughing, calling them fools, and attempting to explain that it was but a reflection of the moon shining down on the pond. But the two didn't look, they just kept on raking at the white and shining thing in the pond, till he nearly burst his sides laughing.
"That beats it all clean, to see you crazy idiots raking at the moon," he cried, and with that he rode away. Once he was gone, they rolled the barrels out from the reed as quickly as possible, got them onto the cart, covered them in a layer of hay, and left the pond, the donkey now moving. But that wasn't the reason why the brandy was not delivered. He was waiting on a cloudy, wet night in order to sneak it away. Parrot obviously laughed long and hard at the story. Chapman flushed a deep shade of red and told Parrot to keep the story quiet. Giving his word, the barrels of French brandy were safely stored in his cellar, no harm done after the dunking. But somehow the story did get out. The excise man couldn't resist and told the tale to all of his friends.
And on that note, we've come to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to hear more stories about Wiltshire's history, you can check out our other episodes and subscribe to the podcast.
We'd also like to thank our editors for this episode. We'd really appreciate it if you stay tuned for our future installments. Thank you once again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of Moonraker's Tales, Wiltshire's Story.